Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. I promised my colleagues on the Council of Convocation that we would keep this to a timely start this evening. We've been delighted that we've got over 300 representatives of Convocation indicating that they'd like to come along this evening, and I think looking around the room we're certainly getting very close to that number. For those I haven't had the opportunity to meet, my name is Warren Kerr, and in my role as the Warden of Convocation, I'll be your MC for the proceedings this evening. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the second ordinary meeting for 2014. I'd particularly like to welcome former Chancellor Dr. Ken Michael, AC, former Chancellor Clinical Professor Alex Cohen, AO, our Vice-Chancellor Paul Johnson, Mr. Tom Henderson, the Guild President, our guest speaker, Chief Scientist of Western Australia, Professor Peter Klinken, Mr. Paul McCann, AM, the Deputy Warden of Convocation, members of the UWA Senate and the Council of Convocation, Ms. Brenda Tournier, the Associate Director for Alumni Relations and Community Engagement, and all the lifelong members of Convocation present here this evening. Welcome one and all. It is the custom of the University to recognise that our activities take place on Noongar land and that the Noongar people are the spiritual and cultural custodians of this land, where they continue to practice their values, beliefs and languages. So I'll now declare the meeting open at 6:03 and note that I have apologies from the Chancellor Dr. Michael Chaney and over 600 other members of Convocation who are unable to be here this evening. Next time we're going to start looking to book Winthrop Hall for these proceedings. Can I ask if anyone else wishes to put forward apologies that have not yet been recorded? In that case, I'll then move to item 1 on the meeting agenda in the documents that you have with you. The minutes of the first ordinary meeting held on Friday the 21st of March 2014, which appear at attachment A of the booklet for this meeting. Are there any amendments to the meeting? If not, as required under item 2, can I ask someone who attended the first ordinary meeting to move acceptance of the minutes? Paul McCann? Thank you. And someone to second that motion? Dr. Fran Pesch? Thank you. All those in favour of the minutes? Thank you. Carried. Can I now move to item 3 of the agenda, business arising from the minutes? At the first ordinary meeting for 2014, the Guild President was a late apology. However, when his report was discussed, a question was raised regarding the Guild President's opinion on education advocacy and his thoughts on the level of comfort that students feel confident to initiate advocacy if required. As the Guild President is present tonight, Tom has agreed to address this question while speaking to his report. I also received a question at our last meeting asking if UWA could have a closer look at the nexus between higher degrees by research courses and normal master's courses. As I wasn't able to answer the question immediately at the last meeting, I took the question on notice and have since consulted with Professor Alec Cameron, the Deputy Vice-Chancellor Education, Winthrop Professor Alan Dench, the Dean of Graduate Research and Postdoctoral Training, and Winthrop Professor Grady Venville, the Dean of Coursework Studies. They have advised that UWA have deliberately designed the new master's courses to ensure that they make provision for a research option. That is, students have the option of carrying out a research project and from this preparing a research dissertation. That research training can then, if it then meets the requirements of research preparation for entry to a PhD, they can lead through to that coursework. For example, a student may complete a 3-year bachelor's degree, then complete a coursework master's. If they have taken the research project and dissertation options in the master's, then they can move into studying for a PhD. This research option has also been built into the new professional degrees. I trust that this addresses the query. If not, all 3 have indicated they'd be happy to provide further information if required. If anyone has specific interest in that, please see me following the meeting. Our next item of business for this evening is item 4, correspondence. While Convocation receives enough correspondence to warrant its own post office, the largest amount of correspondence that I've personally received since the last meeting related to a single item, the shocking tragedy of flight MH17 and the death of UWA graduate and member of Convocation, Nick Norris. Many of these communications asked why Convocation wasn't represented at the memorial service held by UWA for the victims of this flight. Unfortunately, I wasn't aware of the memorial service until after it had been held, and I've therefore conveyed this to those who contacted me about this matter, many of whom are here this evening. I have, however, subsequently conveyed my written condolences on behalf of Convocation to Nick's family and colleagues. In an effort to avoid such incidents occurring again, arrangements have now been made for Convocation to be included on the invitation list for similar events in the future by the Protocol Officer for the University. We now come to item 5, the Vice-Chancellor's report, which appears at attachment B of your papers this evening. We are delighted that Professor Paul Johnson, the Vice-Chancellor of UWA, is here this evening, and I'd now invite him to come to the stage. Please welcome Professor Paul Johnson, the Vice-Chancellor of UWA. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Warren. Apologies for a rather croaky voice this evening. It's a delight to be here and able to speak to my report to this second ordinary meeting of Convocation. As I'm sure many of you would know, the most significant issue that is engaging many minds across the higher education sector is the current legislation before Parliament relating to higher education reform. The legislation has passed through the House of Representatives. It's now been transferred or passed upwards to the Senate. The Senate has convened a committee of inquiry. The committee has sought representations from all quarters. The submissions have to be put in by the 28th of this month, and the committee is due to deliver its report by the 20th of October. Those Senate committees, of course, can have their schedules disrupted by contestation within the committee. The issues at stake are of fundamental importance for the higher education sector, and it is significant, I think, to note that the entire higher education sector has come together to support some of the principles of the proposed legislation and to oppose some of the principles of the proposed legislation. The sector is supporting the concept of deregulation, of the government withdrawing from its current stance of setting prices, but the sector is opposed to a number of issues. It's opposed to the high level of funding cuts that the government wishes to impose on the sector. It's opposed to the use of the government bond rate as the interest rate for student debt. I would say that those are the two key issues on which we clearly disagree with the government's proposals. But overall, across all 39 universities, we understand that unless more revenue comes into the higher education sector, we will, both individually as institutions and as a sector, we will go backwards, and particularly so in relation to the rapidly developing higher education sectors in our nearest neighbouring countries across Southeast Asia. Those countries are investing very heavily in higher education. Public investment in higher education in China is now approaching 2% of GDP. Australia has one of the lowest rates of public investment in higher education in the world, in the developed world, at 0.5% of GDP. So there is a very, very large gap, but we have to understand that at a time when government budgets are stretched, and when there are many calls upon the government budget, particularly those that emerge in a sense at either ends of the age spectrum, great demands to improve childcare and primary schooling activities, and also significant increased costs arising from the ageing of the population, we have to accept that it is unlikely that any government of whatever political persuasion is going to be able to find significantly more revenue to devote to higher education. So, a major challenge. The sector has come together, and we are collectively advocating for the passage of the deregulation agenda. The impact of this, as set out in the government's reform legislation, is going to be quite significant. The government has said it will reduce its level of funding for students by 20%. And at present, the government pays 60% on average of student fees, and students pay 40%. So a 20% reduction in the government share means a 30% increase in the student share. Today, every undergraduate student in Australia on a government-supported place, and all the places are government-supported, pays between $6,000 and $10,000 a year, roughly, towards their tuition fees. And the government pays the rest, between an amount as low as $1,800 per year for a commerce or law student to over $17,000 a year for a medicine or dentistry or agriculture student. So a very wide spread there. The proposals that have been put forward would clearly increase the student contributions from that range of $6,000 to $10,000 to something between about $8,500 and $14,000 per year. All these would be, of course, not charges that are levied up front, but in fact paid by the government to universities through the student loan system, and then repaid by students once they're in the labour market and earning more than about $50,000 a year. Essentially, the repayment is a form of additional income tax at a rate of between 2% and 8%, depending on the level of income, until that student loan has been paid off. That's a current system. The government wishes to introduce a real interest rate into those loan repayments. At present, they are just indexed by the Consumer Price Index, and the sector is unified in its opposition to the use of a real interest rate on those loans. So that would be a particularly regressive measure with respect to low-income graduates, with respect to graduates who take time out of the labour market. So I dwell on this because it is of fundamental importance, some would say even existential importance or significance for the higher education sector. There is no issue at present that is of greater concern to those of us who have both the privilege and the responsibility to lead universities in Australia. So that's the big issue on the horizon. Within the university, I'm sure you will all know that we've been doing well in some areas. We have continued our ascent in the International League Table of Research. This university, just a number of weeks ago, moved from 91st to 88th in the world in the academic ranking of world universities. A truly fantastic achievement, something that 5 or 6 years ago I think most people, both inside and outside the university, would have said was just a pipe dream. Well, we, and I say not really me, but the absolutely fantastic academic staff across the university and the professional and technical staff who work with them and support them have turned what seemed to be a pipe dream into a reality. Of course, we will be challenged to maintain our position and enhance it. Challenged because we know that other universities are trying very hard also to go up these international performance rankings. Why do they do that? Well, because research is highly competitive, and you know that you're doing the best research if you're winning in those competitions. And we want to set our sights high here at the University of Western Australia, we have an obligation to make sure that we're doing everything we possibly can to support the growth and development of Western Australia, and to support the growth and development economically, culturally, scientifically, and in terms of innovation. And the university is a very, very important part of the research and innovation infrastructure of the state, and I'm sure Professor Peter Clinken will be saying more about that a little later this evening. So we're very pleased with our research performance. We have a lot of work to do in terms of our teaching, and I reflect in my report that we recently received only a 1-star rating for teaching quality. There's something derived from a national survey of students across the sector. We're not in some respects, we're not in particularly bad company with 1 star, because the universities of Melbourne and Sydney and a number of other leading universities are also in that position. Indeed, there is almost an inverse correlation between how well universities perform in terms of research and how well they have performed in that particular survey of teaching. I should say it's not actually a survey that is particularly confirmed by our own internal surveys of student satisfaction with teaching. But nevertheless, if we're not meeting the expectations of our students, we need to know why, we need to work out what we're doing about that, and there is a lot of work currently underway through our Education Futures programme, both to analyse the views of students, to analyse the views also of the academic staff who are undertaking the teaching, and to try to make sure that we can have a better alignment between what the expectations of the teachers are and what the expectations of the students are. One of the things I think we have to devote more attention to is the issue of transition from high school to university. I think we, to some extent, take it for granted that because we admit students who are very able and have performed well in Year 12 examinations, that they are fully suited and prepared for university study. And actually, I think many of them aren't. We know, for instance, from some of the analysis we've undertaken of first-year teaching, particularly where we use new teaching methods, where we have much more problem-based learning, much more teamwork teaching. We know that some students really love that, the expectations put on them, and others find it very difficult to come to terms with. Because at Year 12, at Year 11, in much of senior high school, it is the teacher who introduces the subject to the student in the classroom, and then the students go away and do the work. Increasingly, we are developing teaching methods where the students are expected to introduce themselves to the material, come along with that degree of knowledge and understanding, and then test out their understanding in the classroom and in the lecture room. Half our students love that, half of them find it very challenging because it's not what they're used to. So we need to do more work in terms of preparing students for the transition from high school to university. Just last week, I was talking to the principal of a major school in Perth, who said to me, he said, "This is a challenge." He said, we're trying to prepare our students for the 21st century, but they are then subjected at the end of Year 12 to a 19th century examination system. And I have to say that 19th century examination system originally was created by the university sector in order to rank students so that we could select the best students to admit to the very limited number of university places that were provided by and funded by government. We will, within a few years, if deregulation is passed by Parliament, we will move from a position where there has been a shortage of places in higher education to one where there will be a surplus, where there will be excess supply. And in those circumstances, I think we will have to ask some very, very deep and fundamental questions as to what we're trying to do with Year 12 examinations, whose purposes are being served by these examinations, and whether they are really the best way of preparing young adults for the world of further study or the world of employment. It's a debate that hasn't really got going because it's almost too hard to do. There are so many stakeholders, many of whom will say we're not happy with this, but no one feels empowered to take the discussion forward. I think we have an opportunity in the university at least to try to initiate that discussion. Whether we will be able to carry it forward, I don't know, but I think we should at least have a go. There are many other things in my report. I'm happy to talk about them, respond to questions insofar as I'm able to, or hear your comments on the university, subject to the time constraints, and I know we have some significant ones. So I'll hand over to the Warden for guidance on that.
Thank you very much, Paul. In the tradition of the ordinary meetings at the university, this is the chance for the university community to basically ask any question that they feel like of the Vice-Chancellor, the Guild President and the Warden. So if there are any questions, we have a microphone at the back which should shoot across to the far side if we can, Tracy. Thank you very much. And I was told at the last ordinary meeting that I'd let the discussion go on too long, but there's an opportunity. Please, just if you can announce your name and the question. I don't think that's on yet. Might just need to be switched.
Hello. Yeah, my name is Tim Diamond, and I have a question about your claim about the unity within the university sector, in particular the unity around the deregulation agenda in the higher education bills that are up there. I would put it to you that the sector is not unified around the deregulation agenda, and that the Vice-Chancellors of the group of 8 universities, including yourself, are not in fact representing that to government. You are the prime cause of disunity within the sector by taking up and advocating such an agenda.
Well, I have to say I absolutely refute that challenge. Universities Australia, the peak body for all 39 universities, is absolutely united. Every university has signed up to this. Just today, with Deborah Terry, the Vice-Chancellor of Curtin University, I have signed a joint letter that has gone to every Western Australian federal parliamentarian saying that our 2 universities are in accord with Universities Australia in supporting the principles of deregulation. So those are the facts.
There was another question up the back, I think.
Thank you, Vice-Chancellor. Thank you for a very good summary of what's happening at the moment. My greatest concern is that if you've got countries outside Australia which aren't as well off as we are, and we know we're very well off because we've been careful, and they're giving the respect to the youth by investing in them, and we're not, I think that causes serious concern, and I feel that when you've been representing that you should have represented that far more strongly, that if they can do that, why can't we? Secondly, with the initiatives that they do, they show a far greater respect to their resources of young people coming through, that we should be showing more than them. And if we're showing less, then it's not surprising that we have problems. You need to express their respect for youth through the finance you give to this particular sector, because the youth that come through to university are the ones that want to win and do things in a positive way, contribute substantially to the future. And these people deserve that respect. With the new legislation coming through and the new HECS, I ask this question: do you think it's fair, and I do not, that the youth that are going through, or anybody going through, a HECS deck might be fine, but if they have to pay interest on that, I think that is a sign of disrespect and should not be put in. I think you should be fighting far more strongly that interest payment on the future tax deck, HECS deck, which could be greater, should be abolished and should never get past first base. Thirdly, with the high... No, that's enough. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, the sector is unanimous that there should be no real interest rate on HECS debts. And the Minister, Minister Pine, has indicated in some speeches that he has made that he is prepared to look at the issue of the real interest rate. I mean, I have to say, of course, that none of these proposals may get through the Senate, because any piece of contentious legislation in the Senate depends on the votes of 8 crossbenchers. By the way, 4 of whom have studied at university and 4 of whom haven't. And those 8 crossbenchers themselves represent even within the Palmer United Party, represent a great diversity of opinions and views. But one thing I think I could be fairly confident about is that even if some of the legislation does get through, I'm pretty confident that a real interest rate on HECS debt wouldn't. Could I just say something about investment in the young people of today who will be the community and economic and other leaders of tomorrow? Across Australia, of course, we do invest quite a lot in our education system. We have relatively high rates of university participation, certainly compared to our Asian neighbours, though I would just as a caveat point out that Western Australia has the second lowest level of tertiary participation of any state in Australia. Only Tasmania is lower, and that's a major challenge for us, and that's a challenge in the secondary school system, getting enough secondary school students to finish year 12 with a WACE qualification that will provide them opportunities for access to tertiary education. But overall, public investment in tertiary education in Australia has been in decline since the early 1990s. It has been a decline that has had its ups and downs. It is not a linear decline, nor is it particularly associated with either of the major political parties. The decline has happened on and off through both Liberal and Labour parties. And one of the positive things, I suppose I would say, is coming out of the current parliamentary and public debate over higher education is at least it's getting some public airing. Because in the past, it's been seen by politicians as something that you can cut tertiary education expenditure and it's not going to cost you much at the ballot box because no one really cares that much about it. It's really important that we do care and that we voice our concern, whatever that may be and however that is expressed, whether for or against any particular proposals. But it's important that that concern be expressed so that our political masters recognise that many people do feel strongly about tertiary education and that it shouldn't just be sidelined or put to the bottom of any policy agenda.
Thank you very much. I think we have a question up the rear there. If you could just provide your name and ask your question.
Hi, I'm Robin. I have 2 points. First of all, I'd like to point out that while there's awesome research going on at UWA, a lot of that research is also... Can you hear me? Yes.
Just.
Also done by PhD students and master's students as well, and I just wanted you to recognise that, not just staff. Recently, there's been something passed to reduce the scholarships awarded to PhD students, which will now mean that they will be earning less than minimum wage. However, I can assure you, seeing other PhD students around me, that we work far more than 40 hours a week. Secondly, seeing the new students coming through, there's been I'm a science PhD student, and we demonstrate labs, and there's just been a decrease in the number of labs and practical sessions that students are getting, which means that the graduating students have less on-hand training and are no longer as competent as they used to be. So I think that's something to think about when you're increasing the fees for students, that you maintain the same level of education, practical education included, that they're receiving.
Well, thank you for those 2 comments, and absolutely I would recognise that particularly PhD students undertake a great deal of research and account for quite a lot of publication from within the university. It is absolutely true that PhD stipends are in decline. They have been for quite a while. It's also true that the standard PhD stipend at this university is the highest in Australia because we give automatic top-ups to our PhD students above the government PhD level. But the real challenge is that as part of the higher education reform proposals currently before Parliament is the proposal to impose a fee on PhD students of somewhere between $1,800 and $3,500 a year, depending on what they're studying. which is in some respects pretty crazy, because on the one hand the government provides PhD scholarships and then it's going to charge a fee, which effectively means a reduction in the value of those scholarships by an equivalent amount. It's a ludicrous policy. Again, it's one that I hope, if the reform legislation goes through, will get voted down in the Senate. On the issue of practical sessions and laboratories, I think this is a very interesting one. Of course, I come back to the same funding issue. If we had more money, we could do more things, and if we do, if we are allowed to raise more money through fees, obviously some of that can be put back into supporting our teaching activities, which I regard as being very important. But I would just raise the point about practical sessions, that they can be done differently. And last year we spent about $6 million in M Block at the QE2 hospital. As those of you who come from the medical faculty will know, that's where a lot of the medical tuition is undertaken. So we refitted some laboratories in pathology, in the School of Pathology and Laboratory Medicine. But they were refitted primarily as dry laboratories, in fact as IT laboratories, because a lot of the work that the students are now doing in those facilities, working actually in a very practical and applied way with real issues and cases that come from the building next door, which is the Path West building up at QE2, is actually about, it's using the latest technology, using the latest analytical software to undertake some of their training work in the School of Pathology. So there are significant developments in pedagogy right across all subject areas. But one of the interesting ones is the use of simulation facilities, so simulation labs, that I don't think they can ever replace wet labs, but they can provide much, much more effective use of wet lab time. So that and in the same way that simulation facilities are used now as the standard way of training a whole range of professionals. Airline pilots spend many thousands of hours in simulators before they sit behind the controls of the plane that ultimately they're going to be flying. Doctors and nurses spend quite a lot of time in simulation facilities before they get their hands on patients. And it's not inappropriate that simulation approaches are used right across the board, whether it be in economics or in chemistry or a whole range of other subjects. And the technology is advancing. I don't think I wouldn't claim it's where we would like it to be, but it has changed greatly over the last 4 or 5 years.
Thank you very much. We have time for one further question, just down here. The microphone's just behind you.
Dorothy Collin, you may wish to take this on notice. May I ask whether you are satisfied that the changes which are being made, pathways which are being introduced for Indigenous students to proceed to what are now postgraduate degrees in, for example, medicine and law, will ensure that the Indigenous people will be able to maintain and indeed increase their presence in those professions? Thank you.
Well, thank you for the question. Just to amplify on that, we have 2 specific pathways into our master's programs or graduate level programs in medicine and law, the MD and the JD programs. These have been designed quite explicitly to provide entry pathways for Indigenous students. They've been designed with the 2 professions, and the law pathway is receiving considerable support from the legal profession in terms of placements and the like. Am I confident that this will be positive? Yes. We already have, I think, a very good track record in terms of admitting, teaching and qualifying Indigenous students in both law and medicine. Indeed, this university's whole approach to Indigenous education, which is carried forward across every part of the university, but orchestrated through the excellent School of Indigenous Studies, is to provide support for Indigenous students before, in high school, so we have a large outreach program. In terms of entry, special entry pathways, whilst they are here studying, we provide that support. But our approach is that Indigenous students come in, and they are students. They study the same degree programs as all other students, and we particularly emphasise the importance of supporting Indigenous students to gain professional qualifications in law, in medicine, in engineering, and so on. We do not teach programs for Indigenous students in Indigenous studies, which is something that many universities do, because we've taken a decision that if we are to be supporting the development of the next generation of Indigenous leaders, who will be the senior surgeons, the High Court judges, the leading engineers, the leading politicians, then they need access to the very best education and to professional qualifications. And I'm very pleased to be able to say that we know that some of that is working. Last year, the very top student, the Dux of the medical school, the very best student who qualified, was an Indigenous student. Indigenous students aim for the heights and they achieve them.
Thank you very much, Paul, and please join me in thanking our Vice-Chancellor for coming along this evening. For those of you who haven't had the opportunity to read all the detail contained in the Vice-Chancellor's report, I'd recommend it as it provides an excellent synopsis of the issues currently facing our university. For those who wish to read it at your leisure, you can take the agenda papers home this evening, or a copy of it will also be on the Convocation website next week. Item 6 in our agenda tonight is the Guild President's report, and this is included at attachment C. I now invite the Guild President, Tom Henderson, to present his report. Please welcome Tom Henderson.
Before I begin, I'd like to apologise for my non-attendance of the first ordinary convocation meeting, and I'd like to thank Warren and Juanita for the number of emails and phone calls I received this week to ensure that I was going to attend. They definitely jogged my memory, but I certainly wasn't going to miss this one. Now this isn't the first time I've spoken to Convocation. I filled in for Cameron Barnes this time last year, so some of you may have seen my face before. But if someone had asked me back then to describe the role of Guild President, I probably would have had a much different view to what I have now, 9 months down the track. The first half of this year has been about 2 big things that I wanted to achieve. The first one was to develop a strong and professional guild and to maintain a positive operating bottom line, all while maintaining frontline services and the student experience that is at the heart of the guild organisation. In addition to that, I've also been a part of the numerous committee structure that the UWA community has here, many of which I invited myself onto, which, given my unbridled enthusiasm at the time, I thought was a good idea. But now being on 4 IT subcommittees, it may have been a little bit too much at the time. The expectations of the Guild now, as it was even 3 or 4 years ago, has meant that both the university and students have an increased expectation of what they receive from the Guild. It was no longer appropriate for the Guild to be seen as an organisation that was struggling to remain relevant and just providing a baseline level of services, merely going from one year to the next without a certain amount of change. Rather, we were to provide a cohesive professional body meeting and exceeding the expectations, but not only of those within the university, but of those external to it. With a move to the south wing and a fantastic decision made by previous guild councils dating back to 2009, we've had the opportunity to move into a new office building, and with that we have seen an environment of high quality and efficient service delivery while maintaining a fun and personable guild that has the ability to change and move with the demands of students. Like I said in my beginning remarks, no longer also was it reasonable for a guild to rely on external funding for its operations. We realised that it is important for us to be able to maintain our own services, especially given the uncertainty of funding into the future. And so it was at the very first decision I made at the beginning of the year was to make sure we had an operation. We had a positive cash surplus at the end of the year. Now it's no surprise, being the 101st Guild Council, that this significant change ended up with a $101 cash surplus. But I'm pleased to announce that it has now moved to a $34,101 cash surplus, which is significantly higher than any previous year to date. So that, and with further plans to increase that as we move into the future. Now, representation and maintaining a bottom line is fantastic, but it is also important that we maintain those frontline services, namely catering and student assistance. Now, we made a conscientious attempt to increase both the quality and the effectiveness of each of these services. And we did this not only from taking feedback from our internal sources, but from the university and students. And we can safely say that we've had the highest number of students seeking assistance and gaining positive outcomes, and also the highest number of students utilising guild catering this year, and that has contributed to the positive bottom line. Our Student Assist Department has in particular developed improved links and communication with the university and each faculty department, and the dialogue between those two has been improved significantly, resulting in outcomes occurring before any formal complaints process requires to be undertaken. And the team, which is probably a significant change from previous years, is we now provide feedback to the university on significant issues which we think can be utilised to support the UWA goal of reaching a top 50 university. So I think that's very, very important. Now, everyone at the university will have mentioned the word student experience at least once this year. And the UWA Student Guild certainly takes upon itself to be an integral part of that process. And we started at the beginning of the year to make significant changes in that area to make, to quote the Vice-Chancellor, a stickier campus, to make sure that students stay on campus and want to be absorbed by this student culture. So we had one of the biggest music concerts ever during the beginning part of the semester, of which we undercated, and our 1,500 person event, which we thought we were going to struggle to fill out, became a 2,500 person event, and we required some increased security to maintain decorum within the students, but we managed to increase the capacity and everyone had a significantly improved time. We've also supported and approved more diverse and engaging club events, which is totalling to date, and when I wrote this report a few weeks ago, was just under 400 events, and we were only 3/4 of the way through the year. So that is a huge step forward for not only the Guild, but also the 114 clubs and societies that are on campus. Now it's been touched briefly tonight, the university deregulation of the tertiary education sector, and obviously there's been a growing concern or not of universities and students since the federal budget. Now I'm going to tailor my words as I have in my page, but the deregulation has the ability to be a catalyst for massive change in the university environment for the good and the not so good. And the new policy direction will soon be debated in the Senate, or is currently there at the moment. But without a doubt, the results of which will end with students being expected to pay more for their degrees, and will likely carry HECS debt further into their lives. Now, all I wish to ask is that we hope that the university will be able to improve the delivery of courses on par with the expectations of the students and their increased fees. And we also hope that UWA maintains a student cohort from a diverse range of backgrounds. On another note, the university is undertaking significant projects to do detailed mapping analysis of university functions and processes, and we have been delighted about the allowable student involvement in this process, and I've been allowed to be integral into that leadership team as they move from stage 1 into stage 2. Finally, I'd like to talk about some fantastic future projects that I will pass on to my successor, which will be decided in 2 weeks' time at the completion of the current guild elections, which is about to gear up next week. And these are all, and the majority of them are to increase the student experience and engagement on campus. The first of which is a student central hub project, and looks to provide a central hub for student clubs to organise and manage their club needs. And this is all up on the brand new Guild website if you wish to have a look. And this has been done in collaboration with Hamish Charlie Architects, which has a connection with Convocation, but no conflict of interest, I have to add, through the Warden. And hopes to create a unique yet efficient use of space, and will be used for a long time, and looks to have a significant amount of innovation and technology integrated into it to provide a fantastic space for students. Second, we engaged the architecture students over at Alva in a design competition to redesign the UWA Tavern, which hasn't seen any work done since its inception in at least 20 years and probably more. Our Director of Corporate Services, who we employed at the beginning of last year, walked into the tavern on his 3rd day and said, "Oh, it hasn't changed since I was here." And he was there in the early 90s. So it certainly is in need of some change. And we're trying to create an environment where the tavern is a place to hang out and socialise, and not just a place to go and drink as the only place to drink on campus. So we think it's a fantastic opportunity to engage students from the Netherlands campus who are slightly disconnected, and allow students to be designing areas for students. Thirdly, we have undertaken a significant IT digitalisation project, and which is why we have a brand new website, and we'll have significant processes, areas for students to engage with the Guild on an IT level, and will hopefully further improve our operational efficiency through streamlined processes for event management, planning, student assistance, etc. And finally, after long negotiations with university architects, Guild councils over a number of years, it looks as though we will be able to have, we'll be introducing some independent outlets of Subway and Boost next year, with construction hopefully that will start during the summer. So that's an interesting change from further developments. 2014 has been a huge learning experience for me, and I'd like to thank Convocation and all the members of the university community that I've met during my time as president, for the positive influence they have had during my time. 2015 looks to be an exciting but challenging time for students in the university, and I know that the Guild is ready to take on the challenge and continue to flourish. So thank you very much. I will acknowledge the question on notice that was given to me last time, the last meeting. We're fortunate enough at this university that students are embedded within the university committee structure and the faculties and are allowed and supported and encouraged to advocate for students. The 11 faculty societies we have, despite having 8 faculties, we have a few crossovers from niche areas of music and dentistry. We support them both through training and monetary support for their faculty societies to better engage with their students and to pass that information through their faculty societies and the committee structures which they are involved in to the university. The university has certainly been encouraging of me to participate in their committee structure. Paul and any other members of those committees will certainly know that I'm not one to shy away from a good argument and put forward a student view. And I think that's been acknowledged very well through all levels, from university executive all the way through down to student services. So in terms of the ability for students to act and have their educational advocacy heard by the university, I think we are probably one of the strongest in the country in terms of our ability for students to do that. So I hope that answers the question.
Thanks very much, Tom. We do have... We do have a few moments for any questions of the Guild President. If there is a question, there are a couple up in the rear. We're just getting the microphone to you. We'll take the one right at the back first and then the one midway down in a moment or two. If you could again just announce your name and a short question, if I may say so.
My name is Philip. I'm School of Music. We know that the government is exaggerating things and have a habit to do that. In my day, if they'd made such a dramatic thing to change these and put the new regulations through, the union, or rather the guild, would have been fighting very, very strongly. And we've seen groups in the eastern states protesting strongly. What plan have you got, for instance, or your attitude to not having that interest debt go through as legislation, and also to minimise the financial burden so the government doesn't get away with what they want to get away with? 3 little things. I think the slot machines on campus, I think the cost of those should be reduced. I don't think that young people should be paying that much for the slot machines that come on for the food distribution. My sincere compliments for the show at the beginning of the year. It was the first orientation one I went to. It was excellent. And I think the lighting in the tavern needs to improve because it looks more like a German beer garden than a tavern.
Okay. I will try and take those in order, and I apologise if I miss any. With regards to the interest rate rise, in terms of the interest rates on HECS debts, we are vehemently opposed to those, and we've put out media releases and made that very clear through both members of Parliament, the university, and media releases to both the media as well. In terms of your comparison from UWA to Eastern States universities in terms of student activism, I think is the term that I'll use. We certainly have participated in all of the protests and that have been held here in Perth, and we've had students who are particularly passionate in those areas attend those. Students here at UWA are going about their displeasure in these regulations or deregulation in a different manner to what we may have done in previous years, and so I think it's just a different medium than a protest one. We have a number of students that are particularly involved in lots of different areas that do that, and so I think it is just a different medium rather than that of a particularly visual, but we are participating in that as well. The second one was the tavern. I agree, that's why we're developing it. It's a bit of a beer hall, and we don't think it is particularly conducive to hanging out. I believe there's one about food in there. The vending machines, is that what you're after? Okay, the vending machines, they're a bit of a interesting one. Vending machines students want vending machines, unfortunately, and we are fortunate enough that we have a good relationship with the owners of those vending machines and earn money which we put back into student initiatives. So in terms of their usage, they're both benefiting students on both a utility level and also on a monetary level in money coming back to the guild. So I think they are both positive. And also though the food vans, which I think you mentioned as well, do the same as well. They both offer variety for students who wish to have something a bit different, and also provide rental income for the guild. So there's a dual benefit there as well. I think I've addressed all of your questions. Thank you.
We had one further question, I think, just in the centre there. If you can, again, just provide your name and...
Thank you, Warren.
Tom.
My name is James. Tom, a very long time ago, many decades ago, this university prided itself on being the only free university in the entire British Empire, as it was in the day. Now, obviously, times have moved on, and it is...
Sorry, could you just hold the microphone closer
Certainly.
to your mouth? Thank you.
Thank you. My question was that this university, many decades ago, prided itself on being the only free university in the entire British Empire, as it was in those days. Now, although we've moved on, this issue of deregulation surely also means a cultural change. And I was wondering whether you think it's a reflection of cultural change in the community and what students expect from a university, or whether it's going to drive the change. Because I would imagine if we were having a debate about deregulation of primary schools and 7-year-olds taking on debt and this type of thing, it would be considered absurd. But we're talking about 17-year-olds making those sorts of decisions, very long-term decisions about the impact this would have, what the benefits of going to university are and what it means. And this means that when students are considering university, maybe their considerations are a bit different. When they come to university, their expectations, it's maybe it's only about teaching. You mentioned teaching. Maybe it's about the entire experience. Maybe their consideration of postgraduate studies significantly altered, and surely this has implications for the guild as well, with changes in the student cohort itself. So I'm really wondering whether you think deregulation is just pretty much a fait accompli because the entire community is moving that way and that's what students are expecting and it's the way of the world, or whether in fact this is a shock to students themselves, really is going to alter the way that they think about university, the role that the guild might play, and that type of thing.
Well, deregulation's a really, really interesting one, and we had quite a heated discussion, I would say, in a convocation meeting just after it was announced. And the conclusion we came to was that it was a very complex issue and we may not necessarily have the answers for it. I think you have to look at the factors that are making the universities see this as an attractive opportunity. So, and ultimately, I would say it is actually driven namely by a cultural attitude, not necessarily to higher education, but to what we want in society. If universities had an unlimited pot of gold, education would be free. And I think that would be fantastic. It would allow students to engage in learning as they did at the turn of the 20th century, and they would go on to participate within the community at a higher earning potential and give back to the community through taxes, etc. Now, we know that the government and governments previous have been reducing higher education funding over the past number of terms. So, and I guess the reason for this is probably due to a society's need for a government that's accountable and has a surplus, etc. Now, that is a society's goal, and I think if there was to be more money, say, put into research and tertiary education, that'd be fantastic. But there's also an understanding, and I think an understanding from the majority of students that you do need to pay for a service, and a service which the university is providing. So there's a balance, and you can make arguments for free education all the way through to deregulated education. I think we will see a huge amount of change, and we don't necessarily know what is going to happen. I think the university here and around Australia have to have a good think about where they pitch their market, and not to price particular groups of students out of higher education. Especially low socioeconomic groups need to be supported should we make any changes. I think student expectations of higher education, if they are paying more, will be a lot higher, and the university will have to be held accountable to make sure that those expectations are met. Otherwise, I think the university, especially the G8 universities, will be in for a rude shock when their one-star teaching rating is maintained and students decide to go elsewhere to receive a higher level of teaching quality. So I think it's all about, we will see what happens. I certainly think the current system isn't working. The universities can't afford to do everything they want to do, and they can't afford to keep going as need be. Do I think regulation is necessarily the right option? No. But there certainly does need to be more money in the university sector, and I think that burden needs to be shared by the government, by society, by industry, and that burden shouldn't be shifted to students especially those from lower socioeconomic areas, as though they are the members of the community who are least able to handle that burden. So I think I'll leave it there.
Please join me in thanking Tom for his report. Thank you very much, Tom. We'll now move to item 7 on our agenda, which is the Warden's report. A full copy of my report is available at attachment D in the booklet. However, this evening I'll just report on the major issues that the Council of Convocation are currently addressing. Last year, during our centenary celebrations, we examined our rich history, celebrated the contribution that Convocation has made to UWA, and investigated the reasons for the role and functions of Convocation as they had evolved over the last 100 years. This year, we are looking forward to the new century in which the contribution that graduates and other members of Convocation can make to the university will be of increasing importance. The challenge faced by Convocation Council and our colleagues in the Office of Development and Alumni Relations is how best to structure and organise our resources to deliver the outcomes that our graduates and UWA require, so that we can achieve our joint objective of having the University of Western Australia become one of the world's top 50 universities by 2050. In addressing this challenge, we need to be aware of the context and history of Convocation as it has evolved over the last 100 years. In the agenda booklet, I have provided a synopsis of the key points of Convocation's history and the evolution of the Office of Development and Alumni Relations, which I will not repeat here. However, I would encourage you to read it. It provides the reasons for many of the current issues we are facing. While most universities view their alumni as external stakeholders, the UWA Act created Convocation as an integral part of the university. In Section 4 of the Act and in Statute 17, it states that the university shall consist of the Senate, the staff, the students, and the members of Convocation. As a result, while many of us here this evening may not regard ourselves as ongoing members of the university, legally this is our status under the UWA Act. I certainly wasn't aware of this until I became actively involved in Convocation. I'm sure there are some here tonight who may not be aware of that aspect either. The current staff and students are an important part of the university for the duration of their employment or studies, but it is only the members of the Convocation who are granted lifelong membership of the university. This unique relationship has the potential to be a significant point of difference for UWA, and therefore to enhance the benefits that may accrue to the university and graduates through this association. Part of the challenge faced by the current Council of Convocation is to promote a clear understanding of our roles and functions and those of our colleagues in the Office of Development and Alumni Relations. The roles of Convocation can be seen on the screen, and in summary, that is, as outlined in the UWA Act and statutes, has been assigned 5 key roles: a representative role, a governance role, a contribution role, a member interaction role, and a promotion of excellence role. One responsibility that was not mentioned in the Act and statutes is the need to fundraise. With the changing arrangements, financial arrangements for universities, this is becoming an increasingly important activity. During 1985, an office was established to coordinate these activities, which has since grown into the current Office of Development and Alumni Relations. Initially, there was a close working relationship between this office and Convocation. However, over the years, this collaboration appears to have given way to a policy of separate development. Instead of working together in a complementary manner, both groups have adopted an independent approach to our common constituents, with very little communication and coordination between them on policy and implementation issues. As a result, until recently, significant duplication and overlap could be observed between the activities undertaken by Convocation and the Office of Development and Alumni Relations. However, one of the developments I now wish to report on is a new joint initiative between Convocation Council and the Office of Development and Alumni Relations to address this isolation and inadvertent duplication. We all believe that the current arrangements are suboptimal and can be significantly improved. Everyone agrees that improvement is required, and all options should be investigated, including a new structure and organisation from the ground up that best suits the need of the University of Western Australia in the years to come. I'd like to acknowledge the support that I and the Council of Convocation have received in addressing these issues from both Brenda Tournier, the Associate Director for Alumni Relations and Community Engagements, and also Juanita Perez, the Convocation Officer. Without their support and their willingness to explore alternative ways that we can improve UWA's graduate experience, we would not now be in a position to make the changes required. The next step is to undertake a detailed consultation process with key stakeholders to confirm the extent of the problems identified, and only once agreement is reached on the nature and extent of these issues can we commence to explore ways in which these problems can best be addressed for the benefit of the university and our engagement with graduates. Tonight I wish to report on a work in progress rather than an agreed outcome. However, the beginning of a new era, forging a closer working relationship between Convocation and the Office of Development and Alumni Relations is within sight. Much still needs to be done, but the basic principles have been agreed and the opportunities for improvement, we believe, are vast. This review of the roles and functions of Convocations and the Office of Development and Alumni Relations parallels a similar project initiated by the Vice-Chancellor to conduct a series of functional reviews of the services provided by the university. As mentioned in his report to the first ordinary meeting for this year, he has established an Office of Operational Excellence headed by Professor Ian MacArthur and assisted by Ernst & Young to review the way that UWA provides services. The review we are undertaking aligns with the objectives of this program and hopefully ensures a more effective outcome for both graduates and the universities as we progressively develop a more cooperative working relationship. I look forward to providing you with a report on progress in this important area at our first ordinary meeting for next year. Now quickly to other issues, if I may. One key way in which Convocation addresses its promotion of excellence role is through the allocation of prizes and awards to promote academic excellence. Over the past 12 months, a considerable amount of work has been undertaken by the Awards Committee to realign these prizes and awards with the new UWA course structure. Due to the excellent work undertaken by Clinical Professor Leslie Carler in her role as convener of the Awards Committee, we have also made substantial progress in increasing the number of prizes and awards and in receiving increased funding for some of these awards. For example, with the generosity of Professor Bryant Stokes, for the next 5 years, the Matilda Award for Cultural Excellence will be funded at the increased amount of $5,000 per annum. Since the last ordinary meeting, Convocation has also arranged another very successful 50th reunion luncheon for all graduates of UWA who graduated during 1964. Planning is now underway for next year's 50th reunion for the graduates of 1965. Given the considerable time and effort that is required to prepare for these reunions of the entire university, I wish to thank Pauline Tremlett, Joan Pope, Juanita Perez, and the Outreach Committee chaired by Tracy Taylor for all their good work on these events. Another initiative of Convocation is Unison, the University Societies and Organisations Network, which is a voluntary cooperative network of UWA-based societies and organisations which have a mutual interest in the welfare of the university community. These societies and organisations which make up Unison provide a wide range of intellectual, professional, cultural and charitable opportunities for involvement in the university. Each year, Convocation hosts 4 get-togethers for Unison members so that representatives of these societies and organisations can meet and exchange information for the mutual benefit of both the organisations and the universities. Since the last ordinary meeting, Convocation councillors have hosted 2 further Unison events. Both have been well attended and provided the opportunity to meet and discuss issues of common interest. As indicated in the Vice-Chancellor's written report, the University has also established a new position of Deputy Vice-Chancellor Community and Engagement to provide strategic leadership in the University's relationship with its key stakeholders, including community groups as well as graduates and alumni. In the new organisational structure implemented for UWA earlier this year, this position will play a vital part in coordinating the input and activities provided by the University for graduates and other members of Convocation. Convocation Council therefore looks forward to working with the successful applicant for this position, Professor Kent Anderson, when he takes up this new role on the 1st of October this year. The last item I'd like to comment on tonight is one with deep sadness. I have to advise you that on Tuesday, the 12th of August this year, Dr. Suzanne Baker, a former long-serving Warden of Convocation, passed away unexpectedly at the age of 59. In 1983, Sue stood for and was elected a member of the Standing Committee of Convocation, now the Council of Convocation. Since that time, Sue served on the Council in various capacities for a total of 25 years. However, it was in her role as the Warden of Convocation that Sue deservedly worthy of recognition for her outstanding service to the University. She was elected first as Deputy Warden from 1994 to 1996, and then Warden from 1996 to 2003, and again from 2006 to 2008, making her the second longest Warden in Convocation's 100-year-old history. During her term as Warden, she increased the number and value of Convocation scholarships and prizes to the point where there are now more than 58 undergraduate and postgraduate scholarships, prizes and awards given annually. In recognition of her outstanding voluntary service to the University, in 2010, Dr. Sue Baker was awarded the UWA Chancellor's Medal. Her passion, enthusiasm and dedication for facilitating closer engagement between graduates and the University will be greatly missed. To commemorate Sue's immense contribution to Convocation, at its last meeting, the Council of Convocation agreed to name a Postgraduate Research Travel Award in Sue's honour. If you would like to contribute to the monies required to fund this initiative, please contact the Convocation Office using the contact details outlined in my written report. The next item of the second ordinary meeting, item 8, is the Convocation Officer's report. This report, as required in the statutes, simply contains a list of graduates whose current whereabouts have become unknown since the last ordinary meeting. After consideration of how to make this more user-friendly, we've arranged those missing to be listed by faculty and year of graduation to help you check if there was anyone you may know. Please have a look at that list, and if you do, please contact the Convocation Office, again on the contact details provided. To put the numbers of those in this list in some context, I'm pleased to report that when the last edition of UniView magazine was mailed out earlier this year to all graduates, for which we have postal addresses, it was posted to 70,183 addresses throughout the world. We received only 481 returns, which amounts to 0.7 of 1%. While obviously others may not have taken the trouble to return their copies to the magazine to the university, it is still a very low rate of return and demonstrates that our efforts to maintain an accurate database of graduates is obviously progressively improving. I'll now come to item 9 on our agenda, if I may, which is the independent audit report, and that again is provided for your information at attachment 7. It is a completely unqualified audit report and demonstrates that Convocation's in a healthy financial state and are able to pay our debts when and if they fall due. On your behalf, I wish to commend the work of our Treasurer, Arthur Hemstra, and the Convocation Officer, Juanita Perez, for their contribution to this excellent outcome. That completes the formal advised notice of business for our meeting tonight. Item 10 relates to other business, and we have not received any formal requests to include additional items for consideration at meeting. I therefore wish to ask if anyone has any item of business or queries they wish to raise before I introduce our guest speaker for this evening. We have one over here and one up the back, so yes.
Warden, my name is Peter Farr. I want to congratulate you and the Council on such a good year to date.
Thank you.
I was unable to attend the 50th reunion luncheon, unfortunately, but I was very pleased to receive the booklet afterwards. With regard to finances, I want to take up the point of the awards. As you said, there was 58 awards, but the report shows that the amount distributed was only $5,400 in undergraduate prizes, which simple arithmetic is an average of about $90, which seems to me, I was Treasurer of the Standing Statutes Committee of Convocation, as it's formerly known, some 35 years ago, and I don't think these have increased materially very much compared to what I would have expected. There's many, many high schools and even primary schools have prizes that would average more than $90. When I look at the income from the long-term investment fund, it had a particularly good year with a margin of for the long-term investment fund itself of more than $120,000 surplus. I would have thought it was quite reasonable to have distributed a much larger amount to the undergraduate prizes, Warden. So whilst I acknowledge that there may be more than there used to be, and there's always an honour of winning a convocation prize, the reality is that an average of $90 is not sufficient recognition of what today's costs are, I don't think.
Thank you very much for your question. Certainly the figures you outlined don't reflect the actual in terms of the amounts that we distribute. We'd always like to increase both the value and the number of those awards. Obviously, the audit report relates to the previous financial year. We have had some significant success in the past few months to increase both the value and the number of awards from a number of sources. So we're in a much better position than we are than is actually stated in that report. I think the details, rather than take up the time of the meeting, what I will ask do is for our Treasurer to meet with you following the meeting to explain the detail and the aspects, but certainly the key points you make, one of the objectives outlined in our strategic plan is to increase the number of awards, the value of those awards, and the benefit that that can give to students of this university. Have another question over on the front row, if we can. Thank you, Tracy.
Thanks, Warden. Ray Towse. 2 points. First one is shorter than the second. Regarding the time of start of this meeting, of convocation currently starting at 5:45 for 6. I was just wondering whether there's been opportunity for input from the larger group as to their preferred time.
We can certainly take that on board and have that question raised.
Thank you. Second takes a little more explanation. And it is about role of convocation in part. I understand that convocation provides a mechanism for the voices of the community to govern and to guide the university, in this case to become one of the top 50. Vice-Chancellor spoke of wet labs versus simulation, and the university's recent $6 million investment in wet labs. University of Western Australia is fortunate in being WA's wealthiest university. Despite UWA being WA's wealthiest university, the ultimate fortunate pun as it happens, the ultimate wet lab faces destruction purely for monetary gain. The ultimate wet lab is a prime educational resource and was bequeathed to the university to benefit education. I'm referring to Bushland and Shenton Park. So my question, Warden, is why is the university being led by the accountants and ignoring the community on this matter?
You're talking mainly about Shenton Park? One of the councillors of Convocation gave a very eloquent reply to that whole issue, and he was involved in the full extent of that. Unfortunately, he's overseas this evening, so I'll have to... perhaps if I could take that question on notice and I'll come back to you with an answer, because I think it is something that is been raised as a concern, and I think to have the issue addressed, we'll find a mechanism to get the message out about the reasoning for that.
Thank you. I appreciate that the previous response in a convocation meeting, which I think was the VC, was indeed eloquent. I also found it somewhat vacuous and extremely conservative on the side, in fact, of the accountants. I found no other voice being heard in that response at the time. I do look forward to your getting back to us on that. Thank you.
The councillor of Convocation I was referring to was Colin Campbell-Fraser, and I will arrange for a report to come back to you if I may. Hilary.
Hilary, yes. Just on page 21, point of clarification, the WA Premier's Book Awards, it's actually not, it wasn't written by one person, it was actually written by 23, some of whom may be in the audience tonight, so I'd be delighted if they were acknowledged and not just a solo author of that history. Thank you.
Certainly. Thank you for that. And one further question down here, I think.
If you would kindly allow me a brief indulgence. My name's Judith Cullity, and I come from a long line of UWA graduates. My grandfather was first to always claimed to be first to have his foot across the threshold on the day this university opened its doors. The Cullity family was also equal first in having 4 generations enrolled here. All 4 of my children are graduates, including one who is a Rhodes Scholar. So I'm heavily invested in this university maintaining its well-deserved and excellent reputation. However, I am deeply concerned by this week's revelations by the EPA that 25 of its approvals, including UWA's Underwood Avenue housing development proposal, they consider was made illegally due to conflict of interest in the decision-making process. Surely any implication of the possibility of corruption is something this university should avoid at all costs. I therefore urge this university to abandon any further development proposals on this site, and as a gesture of goodwill towards rebuilding its standing in the community, have this Bush Forever site at Underwood Avenue transferred in its entirety to the conservation estate. This site has now been officially acknowledged by the latest black cockatoo count as being crucial in preventing these species from becoming extinct, and surely having the university associated with species extinction is also not very good at all for our reputation. Thank you.
I think I'll treat that more as a statement rather than a question for a solution from the chair tonight. Any further questions? Just one up here.
Good evening, James Doogie. I have very fond memories of my time here, mostly with the physics department. And I was very pleased to see the recent strategic plan that's been developed, in particular with the set of 6 values, how sustainability in economic, environmental and social dimensions is a key part of the values for the university, and I think that's really important, and I commend the university for that. But I do have a concern that the plan with regards to the development of the Underwood bushland is not consistent with those values towards sustainability. If it's very easy to put words in a document, the key thing is how we apply them. And I think in this case, given the very important natural heritage values of the Underwood Avenue bushland that is in this stewardship of the university, I really plead with the university to reconsider its current plans and work constructively with the state government and the federal government to find another pathway so we can protect that bushland. Thank you.
Thank you for raising that, and I certainly will take that on board. I'll have discussions with my colleagues in the university and come back to you with an answer on the way that we can address that, and particularly in relation to the points that are made about the EPA approvals, etc. Any further questions? If not, then I will declare the secondary ordinary meeting of Convocation for 2014 closed at 7:30 p.m.